Good morning. Thank you very much that you are here and you would like to listen to me, because I hope that I will just bring you very interesting topic, because you should know about the existence of this GDPR. Have you ever heard about these new European rules? Just hands up. Okay, great. Not too many, but still. I think it's very important for you to know what is GDPR. There are 4 words I just assigned to these letters, which are giving data proper respect. That's not the official title for GDPR, because the official GDPR title is it's the General Data Protection Regulation. And this is the new law which was adopted in EU in April 2016 and is becoming effective this May. And why I am just, talking here about GDPR? It's quite important for your businesses as well, because in case that you are processing the personal data, either of your clients or your employees, and if these data touched to Europeans, which means that you are processing the data of anybody who resides in EU. And when I was, very carefully listening to your presentations, and today and also yesterday, I just realized that most of you have to be really careful, and you have to pay attention to these new harmonized rules. The GDPR, the main objective why the GDPR is here, is this picture. Because if you look at this picture, you see so many applications, and we are just living in the world of the social media. And current legislation in Europe comes from 95 years. So if you look at all these applications, I would say that at least 2/3 of the applications didn't exist in these years. That's why Europe just decided to basically to align the legislation to this new technological movement. And why that? Because data are becoming very valuable assets, and everybody would like to profile us. If you look at the most richest companies in the world, most of them are based here in Silicon Valley, like Facebook, like Amazon, like Google. All of them just working with our data, and they are just making huge profit. And that was the reason why Europe said, okay, we have to somehow control what these companies are doing with the data. And the other pillar of GDPR was basically to strengthen our rights as a physical people, just to have a better control of what company is doing with our data. So this picture is quite scary. It's quite scary because of the fines that can be imposed in case that you will breach the rules. And just to bear in your mind that many of your projects are just processing the personal data of Europeans. And because the blockchain is very profitable business at this moment, I think it would be big shame for you, for all of you who are just making these great projects just to pay these fines. That's why I just brought this topic to this conference, and I'm very delighted that I can be here and just to share a little bit, basic principles of GDPRs with you. GDPR is basically based on a couple of principles, and the main one is risk principle, which means that you have to take into the consideration what kind of personal data you are processing and what might be the risk of abusing the data or misuse of the data by someone else. What is going to be the risk towards to the people with with which personal data you are just working and you are processing. So if we go back to your industry, if we go back to your projects, all of you are in blockchain. And I don't have to explain you what the blockchain is, but it's quite important to understand the definition of blockchain from the GDPR, because at the end, I would say that the GDPR loves blockchain because of the security of the data you might have. And at the end, I would summarize, this is the definition of the blockchain from this GDPR perspective, as an electronic database which is secured against data manipulation. You know that there is a lot of various, blockchain systems. There are just a couple of them. It's really important just to distinguish if you create the public one or the private one. Also, if some of them are permissioned or not permissioned. And these are the key questions you should ask in case that you are just developing any ICO or any project or already developed and started the processing personal data. I think that the key issue and the key question is what type of personal data you are processing. And whether, for example, is a hash, is a personal data or anonymized data. Because the main objective of GDPR is just to protect the personal data of individuals. And GDPR doesn't apply basically to the anonymized data. But the question is, are you able to process these data? Are they relevant to you? Or do you really need to know the identification of the person or of the people of your clients? And this is crucial, and this is, I think, one of the most important, questions you have to ask, because in case that you think that you are processing anonymized data, then you are out of the scope of GDPR. But most of the companies, from my experience, they are just processing the encrypted data, and the encrypted data are still under the GDPR. So bear it, in your mind. So that's why if you use any kind of pseudonymization, you have to still follow the rules and you have to be compliant with the GDPR. There is just a description of what kind of personal data you might process. It's a very general, description, very general data. But when you really have to pay attention to GDPR is a situation if you are processing the sensitive personal data that are listed here. I have listened to various projects and presentations today, and I just realized they are so very, fascinating projects. For example, processing the genetic data, biometric data. So you are under GDPR, and you have to follow the rules. Question is whether do blockchains process personal data or not. And as I said, it depends what kind of blockchain you create, whether it's private or the public. But even the hashing with your keys can be considered from the GDPR as a pseudonymized data. So that's why you still have to follow the rules in GDPR. I will just skip a couple of my slides because unfortunately lawyers need more time than just 15 minutes. That's our life. So as regards the controllers and processors, there are two also definitions. And from the blockchain perspective, it's also very important to ask whether you are processor or whether you are controller. In blockchain, you are in both situations. So that's why, again, this is the very important question you have to ask and decide what is your role and then what is your responsibility, because responsibilities are different from this law GDPR perspective. There is a lot of new obligations, obviously. One of them that you have to, for example, notify the regulatory authorities that you breached the rules. So, for example, that the personal data, for example, were disclosed to someone who should not, get the access to your data, or your data were distracted, for example. So this is the new obligation. what is very important, and I just mentioned in the beginning, is that GDPR has a much broader scope. So it applies not only to European companies, but also to you, to US-based companies that offer the goods or services, or basically just doing or profiling the data of Europeans. Very challenging question would be in blockchain, what is applicable law? So it always depends, and there is no clear answer. And this is one of the challenging and sophisticating questions we might, ask in case of your projects, for example. So the other topic or the highlight from GDPR is that GDPR just strengthens our data as individuals. So we have to respect that. And each right corresponds the obligation on the other side, on you, on your companies that are processing the personal data of the people. And you might have certain obligations, and you have to implement appropriate technical or organizational measures in order to be compliant. As I said, the key question always would be what kind of the data you are processing. If you are processing the sensitive ones, be very careful, and you have probably the stricter rules which comes from this regulation. You will definitely, as a blockchain projects, you will definitely have one of the most important responsibility, and this is just to creating the data protection impact assessment. Again, the question is whether you need it or not. Again, it depends on what kind of data and what kind of blockchain you are just creating. Blockchain itself is basically the data protection by design, because it's just from the beginning, the data are somehow encrypted. But I don't believe that most of these data are just anonymized. They are not. So that's why when you are creating the projects, just bear in mind that you have to follow these rules, and you have to think about the applicability of GDPR on your projects. If you are doing the business in Europe, if you are doing the business with Europeans, you probably need this kind of person, the person who will look after your processes, and that would be the main contact for the regulatory authorities in Europe and also for your clients. And I just reached the timing exactly. So who can help you? I am just here because as I said, I just wanted to bring to your attention these rules, and I'm just working with this great team from DTNE. So if you have any questions, I am here all day, so we can set up the meeting and we can just discuss your projects in more detail, because unfortunately GDPR has more than 100 articles, and I am not able to share all these facts with you. So thank you very much for your time, and obviously presentation will be available, so just let me know if you need it. Thank you.